Hey, my name is Sruti. I'm an author and spiritual teacher, and I write and talk about my experience of spiritual awakening and chronic pain. In 2018, I had an allergic reaction to an ear piercing that radically altered my appearance and my life. The condition, which is rare, is called erythromelalgia and feels like you have a hot frying pan stuck to your ear and face. I was also on prednisone for 6 years, which radically altered my appearance for the duration of the illness. Most doctors didn't think I would recover, but that is why I'm sharing what I have to share, because it helped me get through it, and it can help you get through your problems too. Hope you enjoy. Back in 2008, a long time before I had the allergic reaction to the ear piercing that set off this inflammatory illness called erythromelalgia, I had a different allergic reaction to a medication called Bactrim. And Bactrim, I didn't know this at the time, but Bactrim is what's called a sulfa drug. And sulfa drugs are a category that contains sulfa, and people are commonly allergic to it. So I did not realize at the time, and not for another 10 years actually, that my mother is also allergic to sulfa drugs. And when you have a family member who's allergic, you are genetically prone to be allergic to the same class of medication. So first of all, I didn't need to be taking this medication. This was a preventative measure for just a routine urine check that I had at my annual doctor appointment. And my primary prescribed it because there had been a small sign of an infection in the sample, but I didn't have any symptoms. This was symptoms of a UTI, basically. And Bactrim is used to treat UTIs. So I didn't know it was Bactrim. It wasn't a time in my life where I was checking up on medications. I just went with what the doctor told me. I did call and question the doctor. I said, I really don't have signs of infection. Are you sure I should take it? And she said, just take it preventatively. So I took it. Within 12 hours, within a few hours really, but definitely within a 12-hour period, I was in severe pain that did not go away ever. So basically it sort of gave me a UTI that I didn't have beforehand, except when I went back to check. First I called and said, I'm in a ton of pain. Should I stop taking this? And so I stopped taking it, but even after I stopped taking it, the pain continued on and it felt like I had a UTI. So for those who don't know, that just is urgency, frequency of needing to use the bathroom, a lot of pain and soreness, and it's extraordinarily painful, but usually is pretty treatable with medications that take away infections pretty fast. So at first they weren't really concerned, but the problem was that I didn't actually have the infection and then had pain afterwards. So people kind of didn't really know. They weren't taking it seriously. They thought it would go away, and it just didn't go away. In fact, it got worse and worse and worse. And I started to immediately panic. And it's still difficult for me to talk about or remember that time, because it wasn't just the extraordinary pain level I was in. It was also a vulnerable place to be in pain when you're that age. I was 20 and just didn't have the tools to cope with that kind of pain, didn't have my spiritual insights that I talk about yet, and was panicking and was depressed and frightened. And I just remember this horrible period of laying in bed in horrible pain, but having to get up every 20 minutes to use the bathroom, but it didn't help. And I'd go back and lay in bed in pain, and just felt like my whole life had ended in this horrible way, but I was still there experiencing this nightmare. So we obviously tried to see doctors. I had one doctor who was a male doctor, didn't take it seriously, pushed on my bladder and was like, "Does this hurt?" Of course it hurts. I saw gynecologists, urologists. I tried strange medications, one for overactive bladder that just made my mouth dry. I didn't have an overactive bladder. I had pain. That was the problem. But no one really took that pain all that seriously. It was a 20-year-old young woman. And it was eye-opening to me how much people didn't care. So fast forward to 2018, and that is 10 years later when I was finally put on prednisone. But I wasn't put on prednisone for interstitial cystitis, which is the name of the illness. I was put on it for my ear. And eventually the prednisone and the following medications that ended up being the ones that really helped me, Rinvoq, azathioprine, these are high-level anti-inflammatories. Those are all for my ear, and they're not even technically for my ear, they're for my eczema. And I talked about in my last video how difficult it was to get that medication. But even more difficult and more painful than what I talked about going through that for my ear was actually getting any kind of treatment for interstitial cystitis. So in order to get, the medications that help my ear, the same issue of allergic reaction leading to an inflammatory illness that doesn't go away. The same medications that helped the inflammation in my ear ended up helping the interstitial cystitis. Not 100%, but to about 80%, I would say. So it really, really changed my life. It really, for the first time, took down some pretty extreme pain level. And so in order to get that medication for interstitial cystitis, I had to be told there was no cure, be put on medications that doctors knew wouldn't work, wait 10 years, have an allergic reaction to an ear piercing, get put on prednisone that I couldn't come off of, travel across the country, stay on prednisone for 6 years, see countless specialists who prescribed countless wrong medications. I had to be on 20 different meds, partially because rather than prescribe the medication you're asking for, doctors will first prescribe every single other medication that could possibly maybe do something before the medications that are higher tier and have more side effects and so on and so forth. Because I was on prednisone that long, I had to endure high blood pressure, high blood sugar, fatty liver disease, 4 to 5 broken bones in each foot, 2 fractures in each hip, cataracts and the resulting cataract surgery, a bone marrow biopsy because they were afraid I had leukemia because one of the medications messed with my white blood cell count. I don't have leukemia, thank God. I had to have shingles for about a year, which was another case of having an allergic reaction to a medication I shouldn't have been on. I had to have 2 foot surgeries and finally find a doctor who would take a risk to save my life from the ear in order to be treated for interstitial cystitis. So I pretty much had to die or get pretty close to it to get proper treatment for interstitial cystitis. That is so frightening and disturbing. And whether or not you ever encounter this rare illness, especially if you are female, you should be taking note of this. This is something very, very frightening about our current society and mindset. I'm not going to sit here and brag for fun. I'm just going to say that I've had a lot of potential opportunities in my life. I was always at the top of my class. I was intelligent. I'm an artist. I'm creative, forward-thinking. I've won multiple writing awards. I've met famous authors, J.K. Rowling, Brian Jakes. I was a pen pal with Philip Pullman after I won a writing award when one of his books was coming out and he visited my town. I won multiple art awards. I was in a sorority. I was a university tour guide. I had so many community service hours that I was offered a scholarship at university. It was like over 200 hours of community service just in high school from all of the activities I was involved in. I was the president of my high school chapter of Amnesty International. I was on sports teams. So I play piano, I play guitar. There were so many opportunities that were absolutely wasted by this illness. Not to mention my personal life and the quality of my life. So as a young woman with so much opportunity in front of her and who should have had value in our society, it is shocking the amount of poor treatment I have received for this illness. And if that kind of treatment is happening to someone like me, you can imagine the poor treatment other people must be receiving as well. You can also imagine how undervalued women must be in our society if we care so little about a young woman's whole life that we would waste it, knowing that there are solutions out there because I ended up finding them. I practically had to die to get the treatment I'm on, and it is not because any human being on the earth actually helped me get that resolution. That was all divine intervention. And it showed me a lot of things. It showed me that I thought we were beyond feminism. It showed me how little value my life really has as a young woman in society. It showed me how to find peace in the midst of pain, which I've talked about in countless videos. The ability to see beneath the false layers of our minds and emotional reactions and even the control over our bodies, to see beneath even our eyesight, breathing, and consciousness. back to the source of the true seer that we actually are, which is the one that is beyond pain. And I have needed this desperately because I was left for more than a decade in unresolved, very severe, very vulnerable type of pain. A type of pain that people don't want to look at or talk about, which unfortunately for me means that no one wants to help me solve it. I mean, we're talking bladder and vaginal pain. Even saying it publicly sounds pretty uncomfortable. But when you get to the point where you had an allergic reaction to a medication a doctor told you to take, and then you're cast out by that same system, essentially blamed for your own medical problem, and then left untreated indefinitely, just discarded, then you get a little bit more outspoken over time. I knew this was going to be an issue from the beginning when I saw how many women with interstitial cystitis have this illness go unresolved for life. And it frightened me, and it still frightens me. I'm one of the lucky ones because I stumbled across something that has at least taken my pain level down from excruciating to uncomfortable. I know that pretty close to 100% healing is possible. I don't know how to get there. I know that if society really cared, we would be funding research for a cure for this illness, but I don't even know if anyone is even working on this. I don't know if any medical professional cares enough to work on interstitial cystitis. I mean, this is an illness that most commonly affects women. It's basically a women's illness. I mean, there are very rare cases that men get this, but by and large, we would have to care about women to care about this illness. So by not caring about this illness, I was shown how little society actually cares about women. The moment you might have an allergic reaction or have a UTI that doesn't go away with ordinary medication, your fate is my fate. Also, the treatment I've received for speaking out, especially the first time when I was speaking more on this particular illness and not so much on the erythromelalgia because it hadn't happened yet, I was silenced, I was yelled at, I was dismissed. So I was basically treated like when a rape victim tries to speak out, they are often victimized a second time for speaking their truth and essentially blamed for their own experience of rape, which is the most absurd thing you could possibly imagine. And much like rape is not actually the victim's fault because it's rape, neither is an allergic reaction to a medication that you shouldn't even have been taking. But this is society's pattern. This was the most important thing I was shown, is that right now when we're in pain, we use our pain to blame ourselves and others. If you're an externalizer, which most likely means you're a man, you blame others. If you're an internalizer, which most likely means you're a woman, you blame yourself. And we're trained to have men blame women and to have women accept blame. And by doing this, by placing blame upon someone, we make them into an object. When we objectify someone, they are no longer human and are subject to violence. And if you're a woman and you are both an object of desire and of hate and blame, you have the explosive and sadistic situation of becoming a rape object. So actually, the whole system of using pain to blame others is the source of rape society. It is objectification, it is rape culture, it is actually the root of all of society's problems. The world that we live in, which is run by a male mindset, one in which we force our way through pain and ignore pain and fight pain and get rid of pain. By doing so, we ignore the guidance that pain is offering us. Pain always offers us insight and guidance. First, pain offers us the insight to return back to the ground of who we are, to live our lives from that place of presence, and to make decisions from that place. Second, pain should not be ignored. It is a signpost, and it tells you to stop and do something differently. And when you follow that guidance, you find helpful synchronicity and helpful circumstances that fit together like puzzle pieces. We do not live in a random world. We do not live in a universe that wants to hurt us. We are actually not meant to be in continuous pain like I have been in, which is why the universe intervened after it showed me all of these problems. And it didn't show them to me to complain. It showed them to me to offer a solution, not just for everyone else, but also for myself. And in order to find the resolution for myself, I need society's help. I need society to stop treating me like an object. And I need my pain to stop being ignored. Once my pain is not ignored, it opens up a mindset where no one's pain is ignored. When we stop ignoring women's pain, because women have a lot of feminine guidance that can change the way we interact with each other and the planet, we will find hidden solutions that we didn't even know existed. Technological advances, medical breakthroughs, societal transformations, even environmental improvements are all waiting on our shift in mindset from blaming women, as Adam has done from the time of Adam and Eve, when he blamed Eve for the fall of man and finding all of the pain and death and suffering that existed outside of the Garden of Eden. When we reverse this archaic pattern by using pain as a tool to find the source of ourselves, and therefore also accepting pain as a form of guidance in our lives, we will halt the cycle of blame and therefore the oppression of rape on this planet. The number one source of oppression on this planet is rape. It is the fear of rape, the threat, and the actual act that hold women back from reclaiming our source of feminine power. Not power over anyone else, but more of a circular, inclusive, communal power that we so desperately need at this time. There are so many women suffering from all kinds of pain from this patriarchal system, which basically forces us to interact with pain inappropriately. So, for example, I worked with a woman once. She had read my book. She had ongoing medical problems herself. She saw the truth of what I was saying, but she said, there's just something blocking me, I feel like, that where I can't live what you said. And so we spoke with each other and worked together for a couple months. And all the times I spoke with her, I just couldn't seem to figure out what the issue was, because when she spoke to me, she was clearly an extraordinarily spiritually aware person. She did not really need my guidance, but what I wrote had been like a confirmation for her. But as we spoke more and more, I realized the source of her anxiety and stress wasn't that she hadn't understood my message. It was that she was being victimized, she was being blamed, she was being ridiculed, she was being bullied. Ultimately, she described to me a life in which she had to do countless things that she didn't want to be doing. So at some point, we got to the issue of, well, what do you do when you experience pain? And I said, well, I stop what I'm doing and I do something, I do it differently. I listen to what pain tells me to do. And suddenly she had been taking notes and she dropped her pen and she said, oh my God. As you were saying that, suddenly it just felt really painful to be taking those notes. And I realized I don't need to be taking notes. And I was like, I know. And she was like, oh my God. Almost everything I do is painful. And I shouldn't be doing it. And I was like, I know. And everything seemed to click into place. And she realized that it wasn't her spiritual awareness that was the problem. It was how her environment was forcing her to act and interact that was the problem. So, for example, there were countless times in my career where I would come up against a problem where, for example, a client would want something that just wasn't working, and it was becoming painful to try and execute that solution. And I would say, I don't think this is the best way to do this. I would like to suggest another way. And they would say, no, we just want it done this way. And so they would force you to execute ideas that were frankly bad and painful to execute. And so the whole process became painful because the flow of creativity was forcibly cut off. Whatever type of work you're doing, there are so many times in a working environment where a manager or a boss says to you, you have to do it this way. So when I say that the patriarchy is making a lot of women ill or in pain, that's not some kind of metaphor. I mean, when you ignore pain like that, it's like trying to work out on an injury. If you try and work out on the injury and push through it, you might rip a tendon and then end up having surgery. So this is the mindset that our actual structure of society forces us into, and it's all based on the act of rejecting pain and blaming others. So it's actually our dysfunctional relationship to pain itself that's driving how we treat each other, especially how we treat women, and therefore how we act in society, how we build society, how we do our work. That's why I say there are so many innovations that are being held back because the key to executing and finding them is the feminine mindset of how we actually interact with pain, which I have written about extensively in my book and talk about in pretty much all of my videos. I do want to end with a little bit of an intense story from my time at Amnesty International, where I read just countless stories of horrible, violent rapes. And no one likes to talk about this, so I'll keep it brief. But I think it's important because it, I think, highlights what all women experience as a pattern on some level. Even if they don't experience this horrific actual experience, where this one woman in some civil war or genocide environment was gang raped by actually the members of her own village. She was of a darker race. She was in Africa. But everyone who participated in this horrific act was her same race. But obviously they were all men. And as a result of this horrific experience that she obviously had no choice in, she was so internally injured. There were so many tears inside of her that she couldn't hold her bladder anymore. So all day long and all night long, she was in horrible pain, and she had urine dripping down her legs. And no doctor would help her. Her village outcast her and shamed her for what those men did to her against her will. I don't know if that woman ever got help. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know anything else beyond what I just told you, except that it so disturbed me that you could be treated, you could be the victim of the most horrific and painful crime on this earth for simply just being female. Like, that woman's only crime was that she was female. Didn't have anything to do with race, didn't have anything to do with her choices. In no way did she bring that on herself. She lived her life as a female, and the risk of being female was that experience where not only was she so brutally attacked, she was then blamed for it, shamed for it, and the consequence was that society turned away, left her to die in pain, and the only person who seems to care is me. And I care because I've been in horrible vaginal pain, left by society to suffer with it because I had an allergic reaction to a medication for more than a decade and potentially for the rest of my life. Had I not had this experience with my ear and fought like hell to get on a medication that I'm not even technically approved for interstitial cystitis. There are no biologic anti-inflammatory medications approved for interstitial cystitis, and the medications that are approved don't work. And more than a decade I spent in alternative medicine and healthy alternative diets really improved my overall health, and I still follow them. They did not take away the extreme inflammation of whatever happened to me with this allergic reaction, similar to the ear, where my body is generating and attacking itself and generating its own inflammatory blood flow nerve problem. What if that woman in Africa was the key to solving all of the world's problems? And that is what society did to her. What if that woman was intelligent and talented and cared about humanity and should have been the most valuable member of society, perhaps even a leader of society? But that is how society decided to treat her. I would think that in that world, we would experience chaos, breakdown on multiple levels of society, extreme environmental collapse, horrific leadership, and we would be on the verge of the apocalypse, which actually I think is what's happening now. So in some ways, I feel a little better that is where we are at right now, because we are in a world where we treat women that way. Yes, this is the consequences of those actions. If we want to fix a radically out of balance, end of times world, this is the problem we must fix. We must fix our relationship to pain. We must stop using it to blame women. We must stop objectifying others. And we must absolutely stop the oppressive crime of rape. This is how. This is not a complaint video. This is a hopeful cry, not even a cry for help. It is just like a hopeful broadcast of what is possible. And what is possible is so incredibly awesome. Like, so mind-blowingly awesome. And in that incredibly awesome world, I am 100% positive that we will not have interstitial cystitis or the crime of rape any longer. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about me, you can check out my website, which is www.meet-shruti.com, linked below. Also, since I am a vastly better writer than I am speaker, I'd highly recommend checking out my book, The Hidden Value of Not Knowing, also linked below on Amazon. And of course, I'm obligated to say you should like, subscribe, comment. See you next time.